We've made many videos on this channel debunking the many exciting and strange myths surrounding the Wild West. It comes to a point where you may believe that nothing is exciting about this era at all. That is where you're wrong. As the saying goes, the truth is stranger than fiction. The frontier had many strange and exciting stories to tell, all of them 100% true. Like, did you know that the US Army had a corps dedicated to what? Or that a particular mining town was a little classier than you may think? We're not going to tell you everything. You gotta watch to find out. But before we do, be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Also, some of these facts may be disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. 1. The Camel Corps. When you think of the US Army during the 1800s, what animal do you imagine them riding on? Horses? Perhaps oxen if they need to pack a heavy load? Try camels. Yes, there was a United States Camel Corps, and it was active from 1856 to 1866. Yet you may not have read it in the history books. The idea came from Major George H. Crosman, who believed that camels could be a great alternative to horses and oxen as beasts of burden. And the U.S. spent over $30,000 for the project, or over $1 million in today's money. The person assigned to get the camels from Middle Eastern countries was Major Henry C. Wayne, and get the camels he did. He obtained 33 camels in all and hired 5 camel drivers in the process. When they returned to the U.S., there were 34 camels, so this corps was already showing promise. And it seemed as though camels would become the preferred pack animal, with former Navy Lieutenant Edward Fitzgerald Beale saying he would rather have 1 camel than 4 mules. These camels did many of the similar things that horses or oxen did, such as carrying items and transporting goods, particularly military supplies, during the World War. Plus, they were able to handle some of the drier, more arid locations, which mules and oxen were not as useful for. So yes, they did have their uses and were particularly pretty good at what they did. You would think that with such promise this project offered, we would be seeing people to this day riding camels. But we don't, and it eventually failed. So why did the Camel Corps fail? The Civil War was a major reason why. The program had high support from Jefferson Davis, who became president of the Confederate States of America. In U.S. warfare, camels also did not fit into the equation, so the Camel Corps fell into obscurity. In fact, many of the camel drivers were unnamed, minus High Jolly, whose pyramid-shaped grave is topped with, you guessed it, a camel. We have strange animal transport, but what about strange drinks? Our next weird fact dives into the weirdness of a common drink many in the Old West loved. 2. The drinks may have contained gunpowder. When you think of Old West whiskey, you may think of it as being purer than what we have today. For example, you may picture whiskey sitting in a barrel without any bad stuff added to it. But this just isn't the truth. There was no standard for preparing alcohol, and many saloon owners would take creative liberties with their drinks. In some cases, they would get really ambitious and add a little bit of gunpowder as a garnish. But don't worry. Not all drinks back in the day were one match away from blowing up in your face. Some alcohol was mixed with burnt sugar or cayenne pepper to give it spice. Okay, that doesn't seem too bad. How else did a bartender spice the drinks? Try mixing gunpowder into your drink, and you thought Pop Rocks and Coke could kill a man? 3. The drinks also contained other gross things. Or how about chewing tobacco juice? That's right, sometimes rinks would contain someone else's spit, with little bits of tobacco for flavoring. Why not just drink from the spittoon while you're at it? Surely it couldn't get worse. Well, some bartenders would water it down with not water, but turpentine, ammonia, or formaldehyde. It's no wonder that they gave their drinks names like coffin varnish. Sure, drinking isn't good for you in general, but what you drink now is a lot easier on your guts than in the past. Accepting drinks from a bartender back then could spell disaster, but there were also some pretty strange characters whose stories were stranger than fiction. 4. The life of Big Nose George. The next crazy fact sounds like something from a cannibal movie, but it happened. George Parrott, or Big Nose George, was a cattle thief and robber whose gang killed 2 lawmen, a deputy sheriff and detective, during a train robbery. He also attempted a robbery on an isolated track located near Medicine Bow River. George got away with it at first, as the reward first started at $10,000, later doubling to $20,000. But then, Big Nose George made his biggest mistake, which led to his eventual arrest. The mistake? Bragging. He was arrested after an attempted robbery of Morris Chan's merchandise. Khan had a military convoy of over 15 soldiers and officers. About 10 miles away from Powder River Crossing, the gang attacked, donning masks and stealing over $14,000 worth of goods. After the robbery, Big Nose George and his cronies got super drunk and boasted about killing these 2 guys, giving themselves away. Parrott was arrested and then charged with murder in Wyoming. His ultimate fate was being lynched from a telegraph pole by an angry mob. 5. The afterlife of Big Nose George. While that last fact is crazy enough, the real strangeness of Big Nose George came after his death. His body was soon in the possession of doctors Thomas Magee and John Eugene Osborne, who studied his brain to find out what made him tick. But the person they should have been studying was Maggie's assistant, Lillian Heath, who was just 16 at the time. She kept George's skull cap and used it as an ashtray, a pen holder, and even a doorstop. Also, a mask was made from his face. But that's not the strangest part. His skin was turned into a pair of shoes. Imagine wearing a pair of leather shoes not made from a cow, but an actual human being. His body was then put in a whiskey barrel, which wasn't discovered until 1950, and his skull cap was recovered from a now elderly Lillian Heath. Nowadays, you can see the shoes and other remains at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins, Wyoming. 6. An opera house in a mining town? Let's get a little lighthearted for the next one. When you picture an opera house, you may think of one standing in a bustling downtown, in the wealthiest section. You don't think one in a mountain town. But that was just the case for a mountain town in Central City, Colorado. Many people flocked to Central City after a gold vein was discovered, including miners of Welsh and Cornish origins. These groups loved music and helped design the Opera House, which was finished in 1878 and was Colorado's first opera house. And to this day, it still stands and still has shows. The gold may have dried up, but Central City struck gold in another way, through art. 7. There was an opioid crisis. When you think of an opioid crisis, you may think of something in modern times. However, there was a large opioid addiction in the 1800s that isn't discussed very often. During the Civil War, many soldiers suffered horrific wounds. When they went to the physician, what did they prescribe? Opium, specifically in the form of opium gum, laudanum, or morphine. But these drugs weren't just used to treat injuries. You had a cough? The doctor gave you opium. You have diarrhea? Some opium should make you regular again? You felt depressed? Laudanum, made from opiates and alcohol, should perk you right up. While medical records were hard to find, many former soldiers lived their daily lives addicted to opium, and there was little empathy for them. They were known as opium slaves, and some lost their earned military pensions. Many had to spend time in mental institutions, yet another reason why this epidemic was less known compared to other drug crises America has faced. Learning about this just shows that, in many ways, America from the past isn't too different from how it is now. 8. The truth about the Pony Express. One of the most iconic symbols of mail delivery during the Old West was the Pony Express. It symbolized the determination for the U.S. mail to be quick and is seen in many films and TV shows. With such a reputation, you may think this service lasted for years, decades even. But in truth, it lasted for 18 months, not even 2 years. While the Pony Express revolutionized message delivery, with most messages from East and West being delivered in under 2 weeks, the telegraph was soon invented, making the service obsolete. A lot of money was invested in the Pony Express, yet it was a financial failure. It is said that Buffalo Bill, who was a former Pony Express rider when he was just 15, and the media in general, made the Pony Express seem more prominent than it was. It's an example of a great idea that happened to be at the wrong time. 9. The Donner Party. Let's venture back into the world of the morbid and talk about the Donner Party. When you think of taking a wagon across the West, you do think of danger, with a lack of food and disease being common issues faced. But the Donner Party was an exceptional case. This group took the Oregon Trail in 1846, with the goal of reaching California or bust. There were 87 members in total. With such a big group, it should have been easy for all of them to make it to the end, right? Instead, their journey was fraught with detours, weather, and showed what things man will do when they're at their limits. The Donner Party's first major hurdle was when they took a new route, the Hastings Cutoff. This route took them across what would be Utah, where they would face the Wasatch Range of the Rocky Mountains and the Great Salt Lake Desert. This arduous journey cost many lives, including their cattle. But the real struggle happened when snowfall hit Truckee Lake, which got renamed to Donner Lake for some disturbing reasons. Trapped in the snowfall, their supplies ran thin. The once united group began to suggest lotteries and even duels to decide who would get the remaining supplies. And soon, they got a taste for each other. One member, Patrick Dolan, became delirious. He took off his clothes, ran into the woods, and died shortly after. He was then eaten by some of his group. The other dead members were eaten, and 2 Native American guides even became their next deal. In February, a rescue group eventually saved the Donner Party, whose members had been nearly halved to 48. While the full extent of their cannibalism is not known, with some members later denying this, it was clear that some horrific actions happened during this journey that showed what humans would do when pushed to their limits. 10. Aliens. After the last fact, we need a palate cleanser. Well, apparently aliens once landed in California in 1896. When you think of UFO sightings, they almost seem like something invented in the 1950s after one watched too many sci-fi movies. But no, in San Francisco, Sacramento, and Oakland, hundreds of witnesses saw what appeared to be an airship in the air. Witnesses said it resembled a bird and had one giant headlight and several other lights. To this day, there's yet to be a satisfying explanation as to what happened. It couldn't have been a plane because, this was 1896. Some claim it was the planet Venus, but how could people mistake Venus for a flying bird with lights? Was it real? Was it a hoax? What do you think? 11. The Civil War went to New Mexico? When you think of the Civil War, you tend to think of the Northeast versus the Southeastern United States. During this time, much of the West was uncharted territory, right? Well, to your perhaps surprise, the Civil War stretched all the way to New Mexico. In fact, New Mexico was involved in a decisive Civil War battle, the Battle of Glorieta Pass. Yes, while these territories were unclaimed, it would be an advantage if one side over the other claimed them. And New Mexico was chock full of mining potential. The Battle of Glorieta Pass was between Texas Confederates and the Union. At first, it seemed like the phrase, "You don't mess with Texas," applied back then, as most of the Union soldiers were wiped out. But the Union won when they reached the peak of Glorieta Mesa and managed to surprise the Texas fighters. This fight shows that you can win a fight that seems unwinnable if you change your strategy. Were you taught about this battle in school? 12. The macabre world of post-mortem photography. When you think of Old West photography, you may think of humorous photos of cowboys holding up money bags at a saloon. But in truth, many pictures you see of people during these have the subject absent from this world altogether. A camera was an extreme luxury, with many families unable to take pictures of their kids until they died an untimely death due to a disease. Back in those times, a photographer's purpose was often to take a photo of the deceased so a family could have a memento of their life in some fashion. For example, take this photo. The child is less out of focus than the parents because the cameras had a long exposure time, and any movement would lead to a blurrier image. Living parents would have a hard time sitting still, but a dead child will stay there. So, the next time you see a picture of a happy family in the 1800s, remember that some of them may not have been alive when the photo was taken. 13. Billy the Kid may have been ambidextrous. We're all familiar with Billy the Kid. Now, let me ask you, is he right or left-handed? Popular culture says he's left-handed. There's even a film called The Left-Handed Gun about a young Billy. But what if I were to tell you that Billy's dominant hand wasn't his left, or even his right, but both? One reason people think Billy was left-handed is that this photo shows his gun belt sitting on his left side. However, tintype cameras at this time would produce a reflected image, so the gun belt is actually on his right side. Billy probably preferred to use his right hand, as being a southpaw was an oddity back in the day. But many people who knew him said he was ambidextrous. One said, he was ambidextrous and wrote well with both hands. The letters he sent Lew Wallace, the governor of New Mexico Territory and author of Ben-Hur, asking for Wallace's protection from enemies while incarcerated, display exemplary penmanship. No wonder he was such a legend. When you can use both hands well, it opens a whole new world of possibilities. 14. The life of Elmer McCurdy. Next, let's go back into the robber side of the Wild West and talk about Elmer McCurdy. McCurdy was a robber who used nitroglycerin, but he always used too much or too little. Once he put too much nitro in a safe, and it blew up the safe all right, but it destroyed the money inside too. His failure as a thief feels like something from an old cartoon. His final robbery was no better. His goal was ambitions, to rob a Katy train that had over $400,000 in cash as a royalty payment to the Osage Nation. This was in 1911, and the cash is worth over $13 million today. Once again, Elmer McCurdy was like Elmer Fudd in his failure, as he ended up robbing a passenger train instead of the one he was targeting. He stole $46, some whiskey, a revolver, a jacket, and the conductor's watch. To add insult to injury, Elmer McCurdy's robbery was deemed one of the smallest in the history of train robbery. And when he made his last stand with the authorities, Elmer McCurdy did not go out in a blaze of glory. Instead, he took one gunshot wound to the chest while lying down during his shootout. And that was the end of Elmer McCurdy. Or was it? 15. The afterlife of Elmer McCurdy. Elmer McCurdy's fumbles in life felt like a circus, but the actual circus came after his death. He was embalmed by Joseph L. Johnson, who did not get paid for his services due to there being no next of kin. So instead, Johnson found another way to make money off Elmer, turning him into a sideshow attraction. When visiting a funeral home, visitors could lighten up the mood by paying a nickel to see what he dubbed the bandit who wouldn't give up. Elmer's body was the pride and joy of Johnson, who did not want to sell it despite getting offers from carnival runners and other folk. However, he had to give it up when two men claiming to be long-lost brothers of Elmer's, Aver and Wayne, came to claim it. As you may have guessed, though, these weren't his brothers. Instead, they were James and Charles Patterson, two men who ran a traveling carnival known as the Great Patterson Carnival Shows. Again, this feels like something out of a morbid cartoon, not reality. His corpse was passed along over the next few decades, including by director Dwayne Esper, who had a film about drug abuse called Narcotic. The story of Elmer changed from an outlaw to a person who died from taking too much dope. Esper even used dope to explain why his body looked so mummified by the ravages of time. His body was used for decades, including appearing in the 1967 film She-Freak and eventually being used as a funhouse exhibit in the amusement zone, the Pike. By this point, not only had his body been mummified by decades of time, but it had sustained damage from being transported so much, including having parts blown off by a windstorm. It was also more wax and paint than man at this point. Most who passed him by assumed it was a prop, including the crew of the $6 Million Man, who were using the Pike for an episode. After McCurdy's body fell and broke its arm, the crew noticed the bone and muscle tissue inside. And so, after all that time, he was finally buried in 1977, with his casket protected by 2 feet of concrete so no one would disturb his rest again. While Elmer McCurdy was not a good person in life, many would agree that the way his body was treated after death was far, far worse than his failed robberies could ever be. And there you have it, 15 Old West facts that prove the era was stranger than fiction led us to believe. If you liked this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Feel free to leave a comment as well telling us of your favorite crazy Old West fact in this video.